为如果不是尖端出版在10多年前2009年的时候出了那个 Brian Freeman 的第一本书《雾中的雷雪儿》，他的作品在台湾的书市就不会留下那个痕迹，那可能就是我后来不会注意到这本书，然后也不会有这个那年雪深几呎这个中文版的问世。那第二个当然就是要感谢，有人听到了是吧？好，第二个当然就是要感谢所有参与买榜的朋友，尤其是不管是买纸书还是买电子书，还是听英文有声书，对，我们今天应该有蛮多不同社团的人在这边，尤其是那个读墨的，对大家参与买榜，然后把这个书硬生生买到第一名，非常感谢。对，如果没有这个第一名，应该也不太可能请到作者来。好，那我今天想先问一下，就是尖端的吕尚业总编，他当年那个《雾中的雷雪儿》出版的，有没有什么幕后当时是什么情况？有没有什么值得分享的有趣的故事？
大家好，我这边也先感谢光磊啊，有这个机会邀请作者来。然后我先讲，我们已经那个，怎么讲，签下他下一本书了，也是光磊负责的。
你们现在就破梗了。
你刚刚不是说要先讲完？
我是说可以后面讲，没关系，你继续。
好啊，就当初那个我们签的是他第一本出道作啊，处女作，然后《雾中的雷雪儿》算是那个时候我们想要尝试一下欧美悬疑嘛，然后我们也经营了几个在国外那时候还蛮有名气的作者啊，像什么 Jonathan Kellerman， 然后那个有一个名字也很长的，反正就是在台湾都是系列，大概都有10几本的，但是我们那个时候的经验就还不够啊，所以大概出了4、5本之后就没有继续下去了，对，然后就想说新的作者就签一本试试看这样子，对，然后那个他这个是2005年出的嘛，其实那个时代我觉得那个时代还蛮。就怎么讲，就是蛮特别的，因为像他这样子的男作者啊，在之前都是比较像杰弗瑞·迪佛，然后那个理查德那种，就是会出的比较大套的长篇的作者，比较红，比较能经营。然后在他出了这本书之后啊，就开始就像我们2009年出的第一本之后，就台湾就流行了起了那个 YA 奇幻风潮，然后那阵子就是《暮光之城》嘛，然后还有什么《夜之屋》啊那种罗曼史，
后来还有《饥饿游戏》。
对，然后所以这一类型的悬疑犯罪，就是我觉得作者也蛮厉害的，他就一直在经营这块领域，对啊。然后我们出了第一本，其实我们也蛮用心在推的啊。就也帮他想了一个很不错的书名，找了那个内容真设计封面，对，然后在那个年代其实卖的还算不错，还有1万多本，对，
现在1万多本是天文数字了，
现在有点难度了，对啊，只是那个时候的1万多本就是可是我们同时期的那一年出了《暮光之城》，所以对我们家来说就是会觉得啊，这个就是不能把它当重点经营了，对，所以我们出了第一本之后，后续就是观望它的续集嘛，然后就一拖到大概2010年才签了他第二本书，对，然后那个就不是第一本的那个系列作，是他首本非系列作品，对，
所以他台湾有出过2本，
有我找到书这边
是那个 Spilled Blood 对不对？
不是，是这个，是 Bourne House。
是那个另外一个系列，那个什么 Kate Bolton 那
个。对，然后这几本我们其实现在回头来看都蛮有趣的，就是他们都已经成为这个作者笔下的系列作品了。对，就觉得他这10几年来持续的创作非常了不起。
他后来其实在那个 Stride 就是
雷雪那系列
第8还是第9本有让这2个系列 crossover 就是有让那个 Kate Bolton 登场这样。
听起来是还蛮期待的，
还蛮酷的。对，
就像光磊说的，这个作者就是我们一直有在关注，但是就是不是放在我们刚好都是因为种种机缘巧合吧，就是没有把它放在主打。对，因为有奇幻的有那个后来有反乌托邦嘛，就是对啊，就是都有各有各的那个流行。
对，然后后来就是那个时候刚好重心都转去做 YA 那一块了。
对啊，那阵子狂签啊。
对
啊，所以我觉得到现在有一种，你那时候关注到他的时候，就想说他的时代是不是要来这样。
我们等一下可以问问作者是不是这样。
而且我看他的那个创作，他2020年就出了好几种作品真的是像你说的，他多角经营嘛，指出有声书跟那个，
对，他好像是说，他以前差不多都是1年1本嘛，有时候甚至会2年才1本。
对。
然后大概到了可能是5年前左右，然后他就开始他说他跟他太太他们就是研究了，觉得说这个出版的环境变动很大，那维持这种1年1本可能不是办法，所以他们就决定说要多角经营，所以他们应该是有意识的去写不一样的类型、不一样的系列，然后尝试不同的
不同的媒介嘛。
对，所以我才会尝试这种有声书首发，然后甚至是跟亚马逊合作之类的。那这个也是我等一下蛮
对啊，等一下蛮期待他分享的。
对，对我会发现这本书其实完全是真的是要感谢有声书。就那时候我先听了那一本叫做 The Chain 有什么绑架连锁，那个是春天出的，春天签的，他们还没出。然后就是这个January Lavoie 这个朗读者念的，然后那时候就很惊讶说，哇，他的声音怎么这么厉害？他真的是一人的广播剧哦，那种切换男生女生，年纪大年纪小的小女生切换自如，非常非常惊人。那后来就刚好看到在推这个 Deep Snow， 然后就买来听了，然后听了之后也是哇，超级喜欢。那后来是意外发现说他居然在亚马逊那边也有出书，而且刚好是我们代理亚马逊的作品，所以就是说他有一部分的书是我们可以代理的。那时候我就想说，你 Audible 根本就是亚马逊的集团下面的子品牌嘛，那你既然就在那边出了有声书了，你的电子书或纸书为什么不再留在自己家出，对不对？没有道理嘛。然后就想要去问亚马逊，就问我们的窗口说，你们有没有要出这本书的计划？对，结果在查的时候就发现说，他已经要出电子书跟纸书了，然后竟然是 Audible 的竞争对手，一家叫 Blackstone 黑石的一个出版社。那黑石出版社它是美国算是4大有声书公司之一。那么这几年也有一个有趣的策略是，反过来从有声书反攻纸书跟电子书的出版。那为什么这样做呢？其实是有一点迫不得已，因为现在美国的大出版集团就是美国4大嘛，像世界兰登、HarperCollins 这些，他们跟作者签约的时候，他们一定会要求你的纸书、电子书跟有声书的权利全部都要给他。如果说你单独一个拿走，他就不跟你玩。那这已经变成一个行规。那为什么呢？就是因为电子书跟有声书的利润是相对高的，尤其是有声书是这几年每年都是10%以上的在增长嘛，所以他们不可能把这些东西放出去。那一旦是说这些权利都被抓在出版社手上了，对于像 Blackstone 这样子的只做有声书的公司来讲，它其实就受制于人嘛，所以他为了拥有自有的这个原创的内容，他就回过头来做纸书跟有声书跟电子书的出版。那这样回来做，我觉得也很有趣，因为它有点像是从一个比较赚钱的产业来做一个不赚钱的产业，因为有声书的利润是高的嘛，所以它要进来，相对是我觉得很有利。然后经纪人也都很欢迎，因为觉得说原来只有4家大的在竞争，其实对作家来说是不利的。作家肯定希望越多出版社去抢越好，所以Blackstone 一进来之后就签到蛮多大作者。那我也发现说他们的 策略是他们会去找那些以前有声书就都是在 Blackstone 出版的这些作家，包括像 Brian Freeman 就是。然后他们去跟他谈说，那你以后你的新书要不要连纸书跟电子书都给我？那有些这些作家原来在4大，就是虽然有持续出书，但是不一定有受到很大的关注或是卖得特别好。那所以当 Blackstone 他提出这样子的条件，很多作家觉得说好啊，那值得一试。所以他们这几年就签的蛮多的。他们今年的出版量是88本，然后说预计到再过2-3年，一年要出到200本书。所以是一个很值得，后续非常值得期待的一股新势力这样。
我光想到你聊那个有声书跟电子书嘛，还有纸书，我想就趁这个机会请教你啊。那这个纸本书跟电子书还有有声书在美国或者是欧洲的比例大概
占比是不是？
对对。
电子书其实在欧洲还好，那我觉得很大的原因是因为欧洲很多国家都有图书定价制
对，
所以它就算有电子书，它也不可能打折，它并不会比纸书便宜到哪里去。那少了这个价钱的诱因的话，很多人就觉得那还是看惯了纸书嘛，就还是买纸书，所以好像一直都没有高过10%，就欧洲的一些大市场。那有声书的话也比较有趣的是。英美系的，就是英语系的，现在是 Audible 是最强嘛。
对。
那 Audible 的做法是比较是零售制，就是你要每个月要缴月费，然后你这个月费可以用点数去换每本书嘛，那不是那种听到饱的。但是欧系的话，就是因为瑞典的那个 Storytel， 它成立以来，它的business model 都是走一个听到饱，所以它在欧洲很多。国家如果它 Audible 发展的还没有那么快，没有那么好，然后那个 Storytel 就会先进去，然后就让那个市场的读者养成了听到饱的习惯，然后所以就很不一样。所以我觉得未来会是这两个阵营的一种对决啦。那现在像美国的大出版社、出版集团，他们都一定不愿意听到饱啊，因为听到饱对他们来说收益绝对是比较少的。所以你如果不少掉这4大。你基本上就你的开头数就会非常非常少，那这个2个对决到最后会怎么样就很难说。但是像 Audible 现在其实也为了可能吸引更多的用户，所以他也开始推出一部分的听到饱。像他现在美国以前只有一种会籍嘛，就是要每个月缴$15美金，就是换一个点数的。他推出一种就是$7.99的，这个是没有点数的，你不能去换一些新书，但是它有一个很大的 catalog 叫做 Audible Plus。那这里面的书就是大部分是旧书，然后让你听到饱。那里面除了旧书，还会有 Audible 自己的原声内容，所以像那年雪深几呎这样子的书，它就有可能是可以免费让所有 Audible 的会员听的。那他们也用这个方式会去抢一些大作家，比如说大作家他固定有在出书，那不可能来你这边换给你们，那他就说那你帮我写一个就是 Audible Original 的有声书限定的，对，像是一个番外或是另外一个中篇也好，有空的就写长篇，没空的写中篇，然后也拉到蛮多作家的。那这点我觉得其实跟 Netflix 很像，就是你要有自由的 IP 嘛，自由的内容。那这方面 Storytel 好像比较没有听说他们有太多自由的原创的内容，对，所以真的还蛮期待未来这几年会是怎么样的。那以美国那些大集团来讲，他们可能就会只有策略性的把一些旧书放到吃到饱，然后可能时间很短，比如说像刚才讲到理查德，那之前就听他的经纪人曾经说过，好啊，那我比如说他有20本，那他也许就把3、7、14集放到那个听到饱里面，那有人听了之后喜欢，他就会去把它补齐这样，那这也是一个蛮聪明的做法。那 Blackstone 我觉得很有趣的是，他不知道为什么好像跟亚马逊跟 Audible 有什么感觉是有什么策略联盟，所以有非常非常多 Blackstone 他们以前出过的有声书都在那个 Audible Plus 的那个目录里面，都是免费听到饱，非常非常多。那我不知道是他想要借由这样来结盟，来打败其他的对手吗，还是怎么样？这我也不知道。但如果你们常有在听 Audible Plus 的话，你就会发现里面非常多的 是 Blackstone 他们出的，新书旧书都有。
那我忽然想到，这本书它的那个算前传还是续集？它也是
应该是前传了，对，
也是有声书先行嘛。对，然后那个我们如果会有可能是我们先出纸本吗？
它纸本好像是美国是明年2月要出，你没有办法比它快吗？
好像没有必要跟他比。
对。
但那本应该等一下看投票，我们是那个现在看过这本人有多少？不然剧透都不好。
对，那本真的是一定要看了一定要看了2。
非常期待。
因为那年雪深几呎里面有2个谜团没有解，一个是 Shelby Lake 女主角的身世之谜，第二个是那个厄苏丽娜这个怪兽到底是什么东西。然后这2个谜团在前传里面都会解开，所以真的是必看这样。而且他的那个情绪跟那个催泪的那个张力，是你如果读过那年雪深几呎，你再看那个才会有感觉的。就他独立看，我相信也没有问题啊。但是你如果看过这一本再看那个，真的是会哭爆。
然后要趁作者来之前聊聊他的那个新作品嘛。我觉得我们签到的那本，
好，就是很多人大家都在敲碗嘛。那其实尖端到今天刚签下作者另外一本新书，叫做《无限人生》。商业要简单讲一下吗？
我就是照你的那个你的宣传词。
你不是看了吗？你可以讲一下你的心得啊。
我觉得那个就是跟他前面的作品比较不太一样啊，对啊，但是是非常像你说的烧脑嘛，就是他的那个事件是会想要一直看下去的，很紧凑，对。
它有一点像全面启动或是那个人生副本这种路线，有一点科幻，然后平行宇宙，
自己追自己这样子。
对，非常不一样。这个好像就是他在亚马逊这边的策略，就是亚马逊那边的跟他讲说，他们的读者喜欢看 standalone 单本的，所以他等于在这边他就会都写独立的作品。那他因为本来已经有几个系列这样。
对啊，等一下想要听他讲看，就每一家合作的，那他是怎么去分配他写的比重这样子。
对。
好期待。
所
以你刚刚投票的结果看得到吗？
可以，你们看不到吗？你们应该看到吧？看不到吗？
我看不到。
好，我来看一下。我这边看到的是45个人投票，然后有26个是已经看完的，然后6个是正在赶进度，9个是买了还没看。
那几乎都买了吧？
几乎都买了，对，所以这是有买榜的，这今天是一个共犯的一个，
太感谢大家，
大团圆，对，感谢大家。还没有投票的赶快来投，在那个右下角有一个鱿鱼游戏的按钮，那个三角形、正方形跟圆形的，里面有一个投票。对，真的蛮多人读完的。我自己快要听完第3次了。我还剩最后一点，然后因为听了很多次，所以这一次比较从一个技术的层面去看这个故事，就发现说，哇，原来你这边就放了这个线索，你这边就已经布了这个，然后哇，你这边的这个误导真的很厉害，因为已经感觉快要讲到谜底，然后就哇，怎么这边就把它带走了，带得超好，这样。就是我如果是第一次听，绝对是被你试得死死的。
光磊，如果我们自己台湾想要做有声书啊，这一本你觉得会有什么实际执行上的困难吗？就是
我觉得就是那个朗读者要很厉害吧，尤其是如果说，当然大部分中文的有声书读者可能没有听过英文的那个版本，所以是不一定会去比较啦，对，但是因为应该是说，我觉得这本书非常适合用念的。 因为我这次听的时候也特别发现里面这个，等一下我也会问作者，就是有一些地方是你感觉说他是特别为了用听而写的，例如说他大部分的对话都没有那个什么他说我说，所以当你的那个朗读者是一个声音可以切换自如的时候，你就真的像是在听广播剧。好，然后如果说那个人的念的声音全部都差不多，那可能听一听就有可能会听到混乱这样。对，然后我不知道是不是 Audible 他们自己的录音室有什么特殊的技术还是怎么样，就是他们的声音都特别的比较干，然后比较脆，特别清脆。因为你每次听那个 Audible Original 跟其他的有声书比起来，每次听完他们的那个 Audible Original 再听别的，都觉得说怎么声音这么闷，这么混浊这样。然后还有像他书里面他们那个小镇叫做 Everywhere，
对，
那这也是故意一个谐音啊。这个用你读的其实没有感觉，但你用听的，就是我从头到尾都以为它是 Everywhere，跟那个荒野餐馆嘛，那原文叫做 Nowhere，
对，
就是说 Nowhere in Everywhere， 就很多这种应该是故意的，那就是他是为了感觉上他是为了用听而能够设计出这种笑话。那所以我还蛮好奇说这个书当初是怎么启动的？是他去找 Audible， 还是 Audible 来找他，还是怎么样？然后他在这个时间他有没有，比如说 Audible 是不是会提供一些为有声书写作的一些指南？比如说你避掉一些小地方，然后让你写起来会比较。还有一个就是它非常适合第一人称嘛，第一人称叙事的那个代入感会非常强。
对，不晓得他是因为这个案子而这样子写，还是他写了之后觉得很适合再去修改？对，
你可以翻一下以前他的那些书啊，有出中文版的，看他那个对话有没有就他说。
我觉得有他以前也是不是像这一本这种写法？
对，因为正常的就是一定会有啊。真的是蛮有趣的。然后我等一下也会想问他那个去写那个神鬼认证Jason Bourne 的那个也很有趣。
那个是你们带的吗？
那个也是我们。刚好是不同的，国外是不同的权利人，但是刚好都是我们带的。他来了，各位。
出现了，我先隐身。
Hi Brian. I think you're on mute.
There we go. How's that?
Yeah, very good. Loud and clear. So happy you could join us today.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled.
What's the weather like right now in Minnesota?
We're coming off of 3 or 4 absolutely gorgeous days, but today we've got a thunderstorm rumbling through, and the leaves are blowing off the trees now, so it's looking like a nice bed of gold leaves on the ground.
Fantastic. So it's about in the 60s?
Probably not quite that warm today, in the 50s Fahrenheit. So.
Okay, that's warm. Well, here we are. As you can see, I'm in a t-shirt. We're in the 70s, I would say.
Well, good. That sounds wonderful. We're not going to see those temperatures for quite a while now again in Minnesota.
Yeah. So, thank you for joining us. We are incredibly excited that your book is a #1 ebook bestseller in Taiwan, and I think it's amazing that it's almost 10 years since you had a book published in Taiwan, but as it happens, it's the same publisher.
That is right. Yeah, that's right. I think the last one was the Bone House.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that reminds me of this unique structure of the deep snow, that there's a 10-year hiatus between the first and second half.
There's a little irony there, yes.
Yeah, you have to wait 10 years to get to the second part of the story. Yeah. So one thing I love most about international publishing is how unpredictable it is. It's like no matter how successful you are in your home market, you never know when a book will travel and how it will work in elsewhere. So a lot of big crime and thriller writers that never worked in Taiwan and are no longer published here. I mean, we're talking about Harlan Coben, Michael Connelly, James Patterson, David Baldacci. None of them are published here. So
yeah, that's very interesting.
If you take that into context, it's even more amazing that Deep Snow, makes this triumphant return after 10 years. And yeah, we're just so thrilled about it.
Well, I have to say I am too, because the Deep Snow is a very, very special book to me. I've been publishing now for 17 years. I've got about 24 books in the marketplace, and for years readers have always been asking me, what's your favorite book of everything you've written? And I've always said that's a very difficult choice to make. It's kind of like picking your favorite child, and yet there's something about the Deep Snow that just resonates with me on so many levels. It was a story that was very special to me. It was a really wonderful creative experience to write. So I've started telling people, I whisper this, but yeah, I think that the Deep Snow is my favorite of everything I've done.
It's like, don't tell the other kids.
That's right.
So my first question is, why the owls? There are so many owls in the stories. Is it like a part of your life, or what's the angle?
Yeah, I've always just been kind of fascinated by owls and by birds of prey. Really, my wife and I are both real fans of raptors, eagles, and hawks and owls. And whenever we visit a city that has a raptor center, we always like to go there. I think that if you look at the owls there on the screen, there's just there's a sort of spooky intelligence behind those eyes that has meaning, and so I was looking for something that would be sort of a symbol that would carry through Shelby's life, and so thinking about the wilderness in which she lives, it just struck me that the owl and Shelby sort of seem to go hand in hand, and that would be sort of just the right symbol to reflect her life up there.
That's great. And every superhero has an origin story. We would love to know yours. I think I've read in an interview that you went across the Atlantic to find your first agent. And how did that work? And how did you publish your first novel, Immoral?
Yeah. Well, I'm one of those people that writing books for a living has been my dream as far back as I can remember. I can remember being in sixth grade class at about 9 or 10 years old working on my first mystery novel. So that passion goes back a long way. But publishing has always been a tough business. I actually wrote 5 books in my life that are still sitting in my nightstand drawer before I ever even started in on the book that became Immoral, which was my breakthrough book. But I've always believed that things happen for a reason, and they happen in the time frame that they are supposed to. And I'm not a lawyer, but I was working at a law firm in Minneapolis at the time that I had the manuscript of Immoral, sort of the way I wanted it to be. And I just happened to find out by accident that one of the lawyers in the London office of the firm was going to be going to a college alumni event with a woman who was an agent at one of London's largest literary agencies. And so I sprang into action and wrote to Robert and asked if he'd make an introduction with this agent and see if she'd be willing to read my book. And Robert was gracious enough to agree to do that, and Allie, the agent, was drunk enough to say yes. And so I sent her the book, and I'd been down this road with agents and publishers many times, and I really wasn't holding my breath. And 1 week later, I got an email from Allie herself saying that she'd stayed up until 1 a.m. finishing the book, couldn't put it down, had already been in touch with a UK publisher that morning saying, "This guy's the next Harlan Coben. I want to represent you. Call me immediately." And so I sort of peeled myself off the ceiling and called her, and she said, "Oh yes, darling, I love the book, and I'll sell the deal in the UK. I don't anticipate any problems, and my agency will handle international rights, and I could do the deal in the US myself, but I've got a co-agent in New York that I like to work with who also handles Jeffrey Deaver, and I'd like her to do the US sale if that would be acceptable." So.
Barely.
Yeah. I said, I thought that would be okay. So they went out, and about 4 weeks later, we had 2 book deals in both the U.S. and U.K., and I started getting these little newsy notes from the Curtis Brown agency in London saying that they'd sold my rights to my book in Germany, and they'd sold the rights to the book in Italian and Swedish, and then Bookspan, which at the time owned book clubs all over the world, they selected Immoral as their international book of the month. And so ultimately we ended up selling Immoral in 17 languages, and we were off to the races. So after a lot of years knocking on the door and getting nowhere, that was just an amazing way to break into the business.
And those were the days when those book clubs still play important roles. That's not the case anymore.
I know it's sad in a lot of ways. I mean, they were such an important part of the business, and they were wonderful people to work with. I just loved, working with all the different book club publishers. But yeah, so many things have changed in 17 years. It kind of feels like entirely new business now. So.
I used to work in this English bookstore here, and we had this forwarder in the U.S. And I wanted to join the science fiction book club, but they only take like U.S. addresses. So I always used them to ship the books to the warehouse and then join the other books to come to Taiwan, because they have these unique omnibus editions of a lot of the classic or out of print works.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so you're based in Minnesota.
Yes,
and I've never been there, and from what I know, my very little impression is that it's very cold, it's very snowy. And I've seen it in Fargo and a Simple Plan. I'm just wondering if that's a accurate portrayal of the state.
Well, in some ways it is. Of course, Minnesotans, I think, have a love-hate relationship with the movie Fargo, because it has poisoned our reputation all over the world. And of course, the irony of it is that the city of Fargo is actually in North Dakota, not Minnesota. But we bear the brunt of this for all this time. Does it get cold? Well, yes, it does. Usually there's a few stretches somewhere between December and March where we'll get some pretty bitter Arctic air, and the temperatures will dip rather sizably below zero. But what's nice about Minnesota is it is constantly changing. There are certainly days where you think, gosh, it'd be nice to have those 70-degree California days all year round. But I find that I love the changeability of Minnesota weather. I mean, we can go from 20 below, in the winter to 95 or 100 in the summer, and we have wonderful spring times, and we're in the midst of our fall now, which is one of my favorite times of year, because you start getting those beautiful days, but then it gets real cool and crisp at night, and the trees are all gorgeous with the colored leaves. So it's a beautiful state. There's also something inherently dramatic about kind of the back roads and the wilderness and those freezing temperatures. I've always felt that this is just kind of like the perfect place to set thrillers, and so it's, instead of Nordic noir, it's sort of Minnesota noir.
What about the accent? Is it the accent, like a funny accent in the movie? Also
yeah, you betcha.
Because I noticed that I was listening to the audiobook of Immoral, and I noticed that Joe Barrett, when he does the dialogue, sometimes he would veer into these funny accents.
Yes. A lot of my Minnesota listeners have sort of tweaked Joe about that. He goes a little over the top on the Minnesota accents. We in Minnesota believe we don't have any accent. It's everybody else that has an accent. So.
Right. Okay. Now we're talking about the deep snow.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to begin to describe how much I love this book. But I think I'll just say this, that I run this Facebook group of audiobooks listeners, and we have 4,000 members. And whenever someone asks, which title should I start with, I always say, go to this one. You can never get any wrong, because the General Lavoie and the story just draws you just right in.
Yes.
I guess my first question is how did this book happen? I mean, I've heard that Audible, they would approach writers to write a new book for them, and how did that work?
Yeah, I've actually had the story idea for The Deep Snow in my head for several years, and I just hadn't found kind of the right place for it in terms of where it would kind of fit into my publishing life. And then Audible approached me about doing an original book for them. They were kind of just getting started with Audible originals, and as I thought about it, I thought that would be sort of the perfect story to do as an audiobook and to bring Shelby Lake to life, and it would give me the opportunity to write in a woman's first-person voice, which I really love the creative challenge of that, and I thought that the immediacy of writing in first person would be perfect for the audio format, because I didn't want a book that was simply being told to the reader. I wanted the narrator of the story to really be telling their own story, so that they would just immerse the reader in telling their own story and their own life, and that's what I was trying to do in The Deep Snow. And I also the inspiration behind this particular story and the disappearance of the child and the long period of time over which the mystery is solved, it was inspired by a very, very tragic true life crime here in Minnesota, where a young boy right around the same age as Jeremiah disappeared, and it was many years before the crime was solved. In fact, it was not until after I'd written The Deep Snow that the crime was solved, and it did not have a happy ending, and it was a very terrible event. And in a lot of ways, that crime inspired me as a mystery writer, but not in the way you might expect. It was such a terrible thing for the community and the family and the boy involved, that I felt like I wanted to be able to write a mystery that would be intense and suspenseful and dramatic and keep readers turning the pages, and yet I didn't want to write a book that was about violence or about depravity. I wanted to create a mystery that ultimately was about the mistakes and frailties that make us human and bring us together, and to write a story where really there are no bad people in this book. There are only good, well-intentioned people, and unfortunately good intentions, we know where they sometimes lead. So that was the essence of how The Deep Snow came about, and so when I finally had the chance to actually begin writing the book for Audible, it was a really amazing experience for me, writing a book directly for audio, because I essentially wrote the book out loud, and because I knew that was how the readers were going to experience it, and it was the first time I had written a book in first person in my genre, and that's very different. I mean, it's sort of like you have to build this level of trust with your heroine, because they have to be willing to let you tell their story. And so it was sort of an interesting dance between me and Shelby of kind of getting her to trust me to tell her story. And in the early chapters, I kind of felt like she was holding back a little bit, and we got to one chapter in the book that I hadn't really anticipated being a real turning point chapter in the novel. It was just advancing a couple of the story elements, and yet in the course of writing that chapter, Shelby actually revealed something to me that I hadn't known before about her past, and once she did that, it was as if she'd given me permission to tell her story, and from that point forward, it felt like the book really flowed very smoothly.
Wow. One thing I noticed, I'm now in my third time listening, is how there are some very small nuances, like you almost never used he said, she said, I said in the book, and that works perfectly for an audiobook.
Yes, I use it very sparingly. I mean, every now and then I'll throw it in just to make sure that the listener and the reader are kind of keeping track of the conversation. But I had a lot of faith in January Lavoie as a narrator, that she's so amazing at embodying the voices of the different characters, that I knew that she'd be able to keep the listener straight as to who's talking.
But you didn't know she would be narrating the book when you wrote it, right?
Well, this is true. I was a leap of faith.
Yeah. So were you involved in casting her?
Yeah, Audible came to me and my wife Marcia, and I think they gave us 4 different samples from 4 different narrators, and they said that they had their own had their own preference, but they wouldn't prejudice my decision by by telling me what their preference was. And so Marcia and I listened to the samples, and they were all terrific, but there was absolutely no question in either of our minds that January was the way to go. And so I said to Audible, boy, if we could get January, that would be wonderful. And they were like, well, thank God, because that's who we wanted to. So.
Yeah, I mean, the way she switches between voices.
You'd swear it was a multi-narrator.
Yeah, it's like listening to an audio drama, very much so.
Yes.
Yeah, and also like the name Everywhere and Nowhere, I think they play really, really well in audio form as well. I mean, if you read them, it doesn't work that much.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I deliberately wanted to use Everywhere as the name of the town because I wanted to feel universal, that this wasn't simply a story locked down in that particular part of the world, but it could be happening anywhere. And that's why I chose a fictionalized location, because in most of my other books I use real-life locales, and in this book I really wanted to use a fictional location. And so I looked, actually, Everywhere came first, and then I looked for a name that sort of had at least something close that could be changed into Everywhere, and that's how Avery Weir came about. So.
I think this is for the only book of yours that is set in a fictional town. I think
there's one other that was Spilled Blood.
Okay.
And Spilled Blood actually won the Thriller Award for Best Hardcover Novel in the U.S. And that was the only other book that I created fictionalized locales. It was still based on some real places in Minnesota, but I actually fictionalized the terrain around it. So.
A lot of people, what they love most about this book is not just the mystery, but it's the father-daughter relationship between Tom and Shelby.
Yes.
And the subject of dementia and Alzheimer's is just heartbreaking. And
yes.
Why did you choose to write about this?
Yeah, people who read my books, I think, will see very quickly that I like to write, emotional thrillers. I like to write, characters and plots that ultimately tug at the heartstrings. And I don't like to write about superheroes and supervillains. I like to create, three-dimensional characters where even the people who do some very bad things in the books, typically by the end of the novel, you have some sense of what brought them to that terrible crossroads in their life. And when I'm creating a hero like Shelby, I'm not looking to have her, be, without flaws. I want to kind of capture the complexities of the challenges of her life, and the challenges of a life of someone living in a remote area where people have to rely on each other for support in life. And so the idea of Shelby dealing with this hero in her life, her father, the man who literally saved her as a baby, and has been such an influence on her entire life. Watching that strong, independent man slowly lose that independence of who he is so heartbreaking, and I think it gives it adds a lot of layers to Shelby's life and helps her mature and grow up as a person as the novel progresses. And it's something I think that so many of us have had experiences with in our lives, that I think there's just an immediate resonance for so many readers and listeners about that.
And one thing I keep thinking about is that during those 10 years, would Tom slip that about Shelby's origin? Because that's very possible, right?
Yeah, it is, and the interesting thing is in the first part of the book, he comes close to slipping.
Yeah.
But we don't really know is that real or not, and Shelby interprets it in one way, and the question is, obviously, is she interpreting it the correct way? But I some readers wrote to me, when they finished The Deep, Deep Snow and said, gosh, it felt like there was one mystery left unsolved, the mystery of Shelby's parentage. And I deliberately didn't want to give her complete closure about that at the end of the book, because, there are simply things that are unknowable in different parts of our lives. But of course, as an author, that also opens up the door for me to do another story later on, which of course I did.
So have you always known her origin since the beginning?
No, I did not. I was as much at the end of the Deep Snow. I was as much in the dark about Shelby, the truth of Shelby's parentage, as Shelby was. I didn't know what to think about that story that Tom had told her, and whether that was true or not, and whether it had anything to do with her parentage. It wasn't until I started in on the Ursulina that I really began to explore what the truth was.
So writing the Ursulina is even for you very much an adventure to find out what the truth is.
Yeah, that's right. I when I talked to Audible about doing a follow-up novel, I knew that naturally, based on the ending of The Deep Snow, that would make the natural centerpiece for the second book was to sort of have Shelby come to terms with the truth about her mother and why she was abandoned. But I decided right from the get-go that I didn't want to simply write a straight follow-up novel. And I don't think it really gives anything away because, The Deep Snow, clearly from page 1, Shelby is telling you that she was abandoned on Tom Ginn's doorstep as a baby, and so it leaves open the question of who abandoned her and who her mother really was. And I felt like the decision to do something like that must have been so heartbreaking and emotional for the woman involved that there had to have been an amazing, extreme emotional story behind it. And so I decided that the natural thing to do was not to actually tell Shelby's story in the second book, but to go back to Shelby's mother in the second book and tell her story about how she got to that terrible point in her life.
So the question now is, will there be a third book?
I haven't decided yet. That it's one part of me loves these characters so much that it pains me to think of letting them go. And yet, on one hand, the Deep Snow and the Ursulina, I think, work so beautifully together as a pair. Kind of Shelby's story in two books. That I don't know. It almost feels like it would be anticlimactic to try to do something more. That between those two books, they seem to be two halves of one whole. So you never know. I never like to say never about future projects. So if I think of some sort of natural, beautiful way to extend their stories, I can certainly do that. As of now, I'd say I think they work so nicely as a matched set that I kind of want to leave them as they are.
I agree. I would be happy if that's it. But if you were to continue with this universe, so to speak, it would be interesting to find out more about Agent Reed, for example.
True, yes.
That's what he did in those 10 years, I'm sure he has other adventures. And also about what happens with Anna.
Yes.
The next generation.
Yeah, and Anna is Anna and the Ursulina itself are sort of good examples of how I write and develop plots, because when I was originally developing the outline of the plot for the Deep Snow, there was no Ursulina and there was no character of Anna in my original concept. It wasn't until I really started sort of assembling the plot that I wanted to add this extra layer behind it that would add complexity to Jeremiah's story, and so the character of Anna emerged. And I was writing the prologue of the Deep Snow and thinking about this baby being left on the doorstep and the dangers of being out alone in the woods. And I started thinking about wolves and bears and wolverines and things like that. And then suddenly I just thought, and somehow I bet there's a legend, a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti style legend in an area like that, and that was how the Ursulina was born. And suddenly, as I developed that, the Ursulina became sort of central to the plot of the Deep Snow.
I think everyone who's after listening or reading this book will go Googling the Ursulina because they sound so real. It's like, so this must be some kind of a local legend in some part of America.
Yeah, and no, the Ursulina is all mine, and of course, obviously, there have been wonderful legends about this beast in the woods for years in different different characters. And I remember thinking, I came up with the Ursulina, or Ursu, sort of the root of bear, and I played with it from there. It's I love legends like that, and I love adding kind of that extra little spiritual, mythical dimension on top of a very grounded human story, because I think it just adds an extra layer of possibilities for the reader.
So coming back to the Deep Snow, I mentioned that the 10-year gap between the first and second part of the story was that, I mean, usually a book like this, you would probably start at the beginning and use a lot of flashbacks and then intertwine.
Yes.
But not like this. This is quite unique. So how did you decide to write this way?
Yeah, I thought long and hard about that. As I was developing the outline for the book, I really struggled with how I was going to wrap it all up, and I went back and forth. I mean, there were times when I was thinking, I should just have maybe 6 months, a year pass, and keep the characters around their same ages, because I knew it was a big creative risk to change the characters quite that much in that amount of time. But part of the story, I think, is to show how the ripple effects of a tragedy change the direction of people's lives for good and for bad. And so what I liked about the 10-year shift is you really get a chance to see how that unsolved mystery has actually made some lives even stronger and sort of eviscerated other lives. And so I liked the idea of being able to drop back in on this community after a large chunk of time has taken place to see how have their lives now evolved since then, and what does this lingering mystery do to them. And I think you see with literally every character in the second half of the book that in some way or other Jeremiah has had a pretty profound effect on the direction of their lives, sometimes for good and sometimes for bad.
Great. Thanks so much I've been dying to know about these questions. Let's move on a bit. So the narrators, I think I've watched you in this video that you never listened to your own audiobooks until the Deep Snow.
That's true. It's been funny. I mean, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the best narrators in business. I mean, obviously Joe Barrett has done so many of my books, and January does the Deep Snow and the Ursulina, and then I've got Scott Brick, who's working on the Bourne books, and Andrew Edom did Infinite, and I think he's terrific in that. But I had never listened to them myself, because there is a music to prose, and so I hear the story in my head in a certain way. And when I started listening to one of my audiobooks in the early days, because it wasn't the way I heard it myself and the way I would tell it myself, it kind of was driving me crazy. And so I said, no, I just can't do it. But with having written the Deep Snow for audio, I just felt like, I really need to experience it myself so I can talk about it with my readers. And so I listened to January doing the Deep Snow, and it was such a moving emotional experience on so many levels. Because she's so good at inhabiting all of the characters. And I was listening to the last few chapters of the book. I just had tears pouring down my face listening to her do the story, and it was such a different and profound experience than reading the book, that I realized what the power of audiobooks really was. So since then, I've listened to Joe doing the Frost Easton novels. I've listened to Andrew doing Infinite. I've listened to Scott doing the Bourne Evolution. In fact, I just downloaded the Bourne Treachery, my new Bourne book, in order to listen to him doing that as I write my third Bourne book. So it's really sort of opened my eyes to my own audiobooks, which has been a real fun experience for me, and I find that I really enjoy experiencing my own novels as interpreted by someone else, as opposed to feeling like it's only kind of my vision. So,
have you ever attended actual recordings?
I haven't. That would be fun. That would be fun to do. I would love to do that sometime. But it is such a talent, and I'm always so impressed at their ability to modulate their voice for the different aspects of the story. And it's been I listened to January doing the Ursulina over the summer, and wow, as much as I loved her doing the deep snow, gosh, I think she may be even better in the Ursulina. I mean, she's just magnificent, and boy, that last chapter of the Ursulina, that
last word.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. I think if you start listening audiobooks with January as a narrator, it kind of spoils you.
That's true.
Everyone else sucks. Sorry about that, but yeah. I have friends who can never listen to a fiction audiobooks. I think for a similar reason, they have their own voice in their head, and it's never the same, and never the right one. So they can only listen to nonfiction titles.
Yeah, and I mean it has to be the right fit. But I've listened to some great narrations. I mean, a man called Uva, J.K. Simmons does the narration for that, and he's just fantastic. And I think it's Julia Whalen who does The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and
she's great.
I can't hear the devil now in any other voice than Julia Whalen.
Also, Maureen Ireland, she did Beartown, which is also by Fredrik Backman. She's also fantastic.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, so what's next? Oh, this part I love. You've said I love it that Marcia is not only your wife but your best friend and your business partner. And and you said elsewhere that a few years ago that you reviewed the rapidly changing landscape of publishing industry, and you decided to diversify, to kind of spread out, and which is why now you have active contracts with 4 publishers. So, what made you decide to go these ways, like the legacy writing of Jason Bourne, and also audio first, and also working with Amazon, for example, doing these standalones?
Sure.
We'd love to know more about that.
Yeah. Well, Marcia and I have been together for a long time. So we've been married since 1984. So we've seen a lot of the world changing over the years. And one of the good things about breaking through when I did, it was in my early 40s when I broke through in this business, is I think for both of us, we lived enough to sort of know what it meant and know what it didn't mean, that this was a change in career, but it didn't really change our lives per se, or who we were. And so boy, changing careers in your 40s, completely changing it to something that's risky and self-employed, like being an author, is a big challenge. And I'm so grateful that Marcia was incredibly supportive of this all along the way. And several years ago, we started kind of seeing the publishing market change in some pretty profound ways. It certainly was changing enough just based on the arrival of ebooks, but then you sort of start to fold audiobooks into the mix as well. And we talked about it and said it felt to us that kind of like the way TVs and movies were switching with different streaming services, that the audiences for books were becoming very distributed into a variety of sort of silos and channels, and so the old way in which you sort of had a relationship with one publisher and they did a book a year and that was how you made your living, we didn't think that was likely to be a long-term successful strategy in publishing, and so we decided to look at a sort of a more diversified strategy of working with different publishers on different projects to try to take advantage of the readers in all those different silos. And thankfully, Marcia just jumped in to be able to help with all the other aspects of the business, and so she handles all of my event planning and does a lot of the social media marketing, and she's also, and always has been, my first reader and editor, and she's tougher on me than anybody in the publishing business. So when I get the manuscript back, it literally is like a phone book of Post-it notes of things that I need to be looking at, which is so we spend hours going over every line of the book, and let me tell you, that's not an easy process, but and definitely it challenges our patience on both sides. But
also, there's no hiding away.
No, exactly.
Still having dinner together.
That's right. But but the bottom line is it makes the books better, because I mean she sees things as a reader that I don't necessarily see, and I know what I was trying to do in a particular section, but as a reader she doesn't. And so the question is, did I succeed in carrying off the message that I wanted? And if I didn't, she knows it, and then I can work to make it better. So she's been absolutely invaluable in helping us through this phase of the business, and so I really focused with my agent on diversifying, and so I built a relationship with the folks at Thomas and Mercer, and I did the Frost Easton novels, and I've been doing several standalones for them. In fact, I just turned in my newest standalone, Girl of My Dreams, went to them on last Friday, so that's in their hands now. And then the Audible projects came up with the Deep Deep Snow and the Ursulina, and then the opportunity to take over Robert Ludlum's Jason Bourne series emerged, and I was intimidated on a lot of levels at the idea of stepping into the shoes of a giant of the genre like Ludlum and such an iconic hero as Jason Bourne, and I was intimidated by the idea of trying to do 3 books a year, which was sort of what that process meant. But I couldn't possibly say no to an amazing opportunity like that, and so I'm kind of working my fingers to the bone on the keyboard at this point. I've been doing 3 books a year now for 3 years, and I've got another 3 on the marketplace that I need to work on next year. So it's a very intense schedule. But what I love is that I can tell very different stories with very different characters. I mean, I can work on something like the Ursulina, which has a female first-person narration, and then put that down and pick up a Jason Bourne book, which is very adrenaline-focused and sort of a pure thriller. If I had to write kind of the same type of book, time after time, it would be a much bigger creative challenge to try to do multiple books in a year. But what energizes me is that from each book to the next, it's such different stories and such different characters, and I just love that diversity.
So in this regard, the COVID pandemic probably is a good thing, because you're locked down at home and you're writing all the time. You're probably more productive in the past 2 years than ever before. Is that so?
Well, there's probably no level on which I'd say that it was a good thing, but it's
on the positive side.
Yes. There's a silver lining, I suppose, in every dark cloud. I mean, I look at last year, and I think at the beginning of the year we had some, 30 or 40 library events scheduled around the Midwest, and they all got canceled, every single one of them. And so as I look at the productivity that was required last year, I'm certainly grateful that I had more time to be at home to focus on the books, because it would have been a big challenge to do as much writing as I was, and also be away from home that much doing events. But I will say, I'm going to be going back next week, in fact, and doing my first live event in about 19 months, and I do miss it, because for me, it's energizing to talk to readers and hear what readers have to say about the books, and to interact with them and find out kind of how the books played a role in their lives. And that's part of what makes being an author so satisfying is the reaction of readers. And I love getting emails and Facebook posts and things like that about the books, but there's still no substitute for being face to face with a reader and having them tell you how much they loved your book.
Yeah, and another positive side of the pandemic is that it makes this kind of tonight's event possible.
Yes.
I mean, we've never...
That's true. I mean, we started doing, Zoom events in the course of the pandemic, and all of a sudden we realized, wow, we can actually reach out to readers in different places that we would never have a chance to talk to or meet otherwise. And that's, I see us continuing to do that. I mean, we've got a Zoom happy hour scheduled, next Tuesday that, we have a chance to have readers from around the country and around the world participate in, and that's been terrific, because suddenly we have a chance to sort of put faces with names in a way that otherwise we never had a chance to do.
So speaking of readers in every part of the world, which country has been a particularly successful market for you?
We've had some great successes in a lot of different markets, but boy, I think it's Italy that has been the strongest, most consistent foreign market right from the beginning. They've been just terrific. All of my books have appeared in Italian, and I just love my Italian readers. They are so effervescent and so friendly, and they write to me and they're just so obviously excited about the stories, and it's interesting because I always think Italy being a Mediterranean climate, the idea that the cold and snow of the American Midwest, what's appealing to them about that? But I guess there's kind of a romance and drama about all this extreme cold, as long as you don't have to actually live in it. So.
Yeah, armchair traveler.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I saw a lot of Italian readers tagging you on Facebook. Like everyone's still an Italian edition of this book and that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one lovely reader in Italy, and I swear every single post I make on Facebook, she chimes in there to say, when in Italy? So.
Have you been there?
I was there as a kid all the way back in 1979, and I have not had a chance to get back there since, and it's kind of one of my bucket list things to take Marsh to Italy, because I know it would be so amazing to actually meet so many of our Italian fans face to face. I mean, I just know they would make us feel so welcome at home.
Has the publisher not invited you before, or it was just schedule conflicts?
Schedule conflicts just never quite seemed to work out, and of course then COVID threw a complete wrench to everything. So.
But have you done any Zoom meetings with Italian readers?
We tried to do one a while back, and the technology was not our friend, and there must have been Wi-Fi issues, because the whole video thing seemed to kind of fall apart. So we've got to try again. So.
Yeah. So we're happy that things seem to be working very smoothly tonight.
Yes, I was a little nervous when I woke up this morning because thunder was rumbling here, and I was like, oh, I hope that we don't have any storms getting in the way of our signal. But it seems to be working great.
Yeah. All right, so moving on, let's talk about Jason Bourne. I mean, when I listened to the Bourne Evolution by Scott Brick, and one thing that really struck me is that you get the Bourne character right in a way that he's a terrifying man. I mean, that is my impression reading the Robert Ludlum original. He has a hot temper, and he's scary. He's not Matt Damon is scary in the movie, but he's probably too good looking that you don't feel all that scary. But in the book, that really comes through.
Yeah, Jason Bourne is really an interesting hero, which is one of the reasons that I love the chance to bring him back. And when the Putnam folks first talked to me about that, I said, I don't think in 2020 it makes sense to be trying to build on what came before. So I said, I don't think we can make this an extension of Ludlum's novels or the ones that Eric von Lustbader had done. I said, I think what we want to do is go back to the essence of Ludlum's character and be authentic with Bourne as a person and as a hero, but create an entirely new thread and setting for him in the modern era. And so that was what I did with the Bourne Evolution. The challenge with Bourne is that there have been so many iterations of Bourne over the years. I mean, you had the Ludlum, the 3-book Ludlum set, and I think Eric did about 10 books, and then you had all of the Matt Damon movies. And there was I'm old enough to remember the Richard Chamberlain, Jacqueline Smith miniseries from the 1980s of the Bourne identities. So people have very different images in their head of who Jason Bourne is, and I was trying to create a version that would be true to however people interpreted Jason Bourne. And he's a scary, ruthless hero in some respects, and yet he also has this uncertainty at his core, and I think what he's fractured because he's lost his memory, and I think it's that uncertainty in his life that makes him such an enduring hero, because I think people can relate to the idea of trying to figure out who you are and what are your values and what's your moral center in life. And so that's that ongoing struggle for Bourne. It's not just that he doesn't remember his past, it's that as a result of that, he doesn't really know who he is. I mean, is he at heart a killer? Is he at heart a moral man? And how does that affect his decision making? I mean, knowing that, you know, his role ends up putting him in a position to kill, and yet at the same time there's sort of this essential reluctance in him as a hero as well. And, you know, one thing I think is different about the Matt Damon movies is that the movies portray Bourne as sort of this isolated loner, and it's really not who Bourne is if you go back to the Ludlum books. I mean, Bourne actually he needs to have a woman in his life, and his relationship with Marie St. Jacques in the Ludlum books is at the core of all of the stories that Ludlum tells. And so that's why I really wanted to bring out that aspect of Bourne's character as well. And so in the Bourne Evolution, he develops this relationship with the Canadian journalist Abbé Laurent, and there are similar sorts of things that go on in the Bourne Treachery, because I think at heart, as he pulls away from people because he thinks he puts them in danger based on who he is, and yet Bourne at heart also wants to have that stable relationship in his life, even though he feels like he can never have it.
So how did this writing gig come about? Was it because ICM, or did they know that you were a Robert Ludlum fan beforehand? I mean, what was the occasion?
Yeah, a little of both. ICM represents the Ludlum estate, and they were the ones that did the deal with Putnam to take over the Bourne series. And so my agent, who's affiliated with ICM, called and asked if I wanted to throw my hat in the ring as an author to take over the Bourne series. And I told her, you know, I'd been a Bourne and Ludlum fan my whole life, and I could remember reading the Bourne Identity back when I was 17 years old. So I thought that would be an amazing opportunity. So, you know, she put my name forward, and I honestly don't know. You know, I'm sure there were, you know, dozens of other writers that were considered for this gig. I mean, this is one of the real primo opportunities in the thriller world. And I really didn't hear anything for about 4 months, I guess. And then my agent called back and said, well, Putnam wants you for Bourne. And so that was when I kind of pitched my concepts for how I would bring Bourne into the modern era. And but I never really found out how they picked me. And much later, Tom told me, Tom Colgan, my editor at Putnam, said that he had read a couple of my books and thought that I think both from a standpoint of plotting and a standpoint of characterization that I'd be a good fit for Bourne. And you know, I was pleased to hear him say that, because in a lot of ways my own books are very, very different from the Bourne novels. And my stories are really more psychological thrillers, not pure action.
Not action-driven.
Yeah, exactly. And yet I think what makes Bourne such an enduring character is the nature of his personality, and I think that's what I've been trying to bring out in these books, with a lot of bodies along the way.
Yeah, of course. Great. How many more Bourne books will there be?
Well, we know there will be at least 2 more, because I just signed the contract a couple of weeks ago for Bourne 3 and 4, and that's my next project. In fact, today, as a matter of fact, I'll be starting in on The Bourne Sacrifice. That will be the 3rd Bourne book, which will come out next summer.
Fantastic. Now let's talk about the Amazon standalones. We were just telling our readers tonight that Sharppoint Press, they just signed up Infinite.
Yes.
And of course there's the movie deal.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, as I said, that's one of the things I've really enjoyed about the different relationships with publishers that I have, is I've been able to try so many different things in storytelling, and Thomas and Mercer, my Amazon affiliated publisher, has been so supportive about letting me kind of push the envelope in storytelling. So Thief River Falls is a very unusual combination of thriller and psychological exploration, and then with Infinite I pushed that even further out to the edge. Infinite, you know, has qualities of sci-fi about it. It kind of grazes the edge of sci-fi, and yet at the same time it's a very simple story. I mean, it's about a husband who has lost his wife and has made a lot of mistakes in his life, and he's wondering whether there are second chances for men like him, and he has a second chance in the book in a way that no one would ever anticipate. So it's it's a wild, fun story to go through, and yet it's also very much a human story about trying to repair the mistakes that you've made in life and become a better man, and that's the essence of Dylan Moran's story in Infinite. And when my first concept for Infinite was actually to do it as a screenplay and to think about writing my first screenplay for the book, and instead I said no. I think I'm gonna my novels are my wheelhouse, so that's what I'm going to do. And yet I think the essential visual aspect of the book carried through, because within 2 weeks of Infinite coming out, Universal Studios had already snapped up the movie rights, and so they're working on the screenplay right now, and we've got two great writers, Josh Oppenheimer and Tom Donnelly, who are working on the screenplay, and they've been very, very gracious about keeping me in the loop over these past months about their progress on the book, and they really get Dylan Moran as a character and what makes the story so special. So Universal's very, very excited about it, and the producer behind it is Chris Morgan of the Fast and Furious franchise. So he's got some great influence in Hollywood. Yeah. So you put that all together, and we'll be crossing our fingers that we'll see Infinite on the screen, because I think it would make such an amazing movie. I can't wait to see it.
It could be the next Inception, if all goes well.
Yeah, I know. It's just got that quality about it, exactly. So,
is this the first book of yours that is optioned for film?
Well, it is. Well, we had an option for the Stride, my Jonathan Stride series, actually, and we came so close. We'd sold the rights to a TV streaming service, and they got right down to kind of the go no go point, and that was right when COVID was hitting, and I think it kind of turned the whole TV side upside down, and so they just decided they weren't ready to move forward, and that was very, very disappointing. But on the bright side, we have now done an option deal for the Deep Deep Snow, and we've got we haven't I can't give any details out yet, but we've got two of the hottest writers in Hollywood are behind this project, and they're just terrific, and they've done a lot of really exciting stuff with the streaming services. So once again, cross your fingers, because I think it would be so great to see the Deep Deep Snow brought to life on TV.
Are they thinking TV series or movie?
Yeah, I think they'd be looking at limited series.
Yeah.
Sort of a Netflix style approach, which I think would be perfect for this book. So.
It's like a Mayor of Easttown, that kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which I loved. I thought that was a terrific
series. I think
series.
It's a 4 to 6 hour episode. That would be fantastic.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
And as that's where the 10-year stretch, I think, really helps, because for an actor, that's such an appealing thing of being able to sort of portray the evolution of the characters over that period of time.
Yeah, it's got breadth of their acting. Oh, we're getting close to the end of this, and I just can't help putting this in. Tell us about your favorite pizza house in the world.
Well, my Jonathan Stride series is based up in Duluth, which is about 2.5 hours north of me, and Sammy's Pizza for years and years has been my favorite pizza location in Duluth, and the timing is perfect here, because the last time I had Sammy's Pizza was literally 3 days ago on Sunday night. I was up in Duluth, so Marsh and I had a chance to have our latest Sammy's. Pizza is in the U.S. is such a personal taste, and everybody has their favorites, and Sammy's is just ours. It's so interesting having the pieces cut in squares. There's just something something untraditional about that I love, and so yes, I hope the Sammy's people appreciate the fact that I think I've delivered a lot of business their way over the years. But it seems like every Stride book, they're enjoying a Sammy's Pizza.
Do they have a lot of branches in many states in the U.S.?
No, they are almost exclusively in Minnesota, with a couple in Wisconsin. And interestingly, that live event I'm doing next week it's going to be in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and we checked, and sure enough, there's a Sammy's in Eau Claire. So you know what we'll be doing for dinner next Wednesday.
Local cuisine.
That's right.
Well, this place is called Aunt Sue's.
Ooh, that looks good.
It's in Taipei, and it used to be a branch of Shakeway. Do you know it's a branch? It's a U.S. branch, and they left Asia, I think, 30 years ago, and the Taiwanese chef, she took over, and this has been a super popular place. They do not take, you can't they don't take reservations. You have to wait in line. You get queue, and it's been like that for 30 years.
Wow,
and
I'm great. Yeah.
Yeah, and they have great fried chicken too.
Nice, that's fantastic.
I'm just thinking that if one of these days you'll be able to come to Taiwan to promote your book, I want to take you there.
We would love that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's all my questions. I think we have a few minutes that we can open the floor and see if we have any questions from our readers tonight. Anyone has questions for Brian, just raise your hand and I'll call your name and then you can turn on your camera. Do we have any questions? All right, so if not, I'll read. There's one question from Leslie. She asks, what does it mean to get your character to trust you as you develop her? I think she's referring to Shelby.
Yes.
How do you do that as the writer and their creator?
Yeah, well, it's such an interesting experience because I think people sort of look at writers like they're a little nuts when they talk about the fact that the characters really come to life on the page and guide you as opposed to you just sort of telling them where to go. But that is really the way it works. The characters need to become human and three-dimensional. And when you're telling something in the first person, it becomes an even more intense relationship because you're now inhabiting that person as the author, and so you really need to allow them to flow through onto the page and tell their own story. But it's like any relationship in life. It's not like people are going to sort of open up right from the get-go and tell you everything about them. You need to build a level of trust and sort of a level of friendship with them before they're going to open up to you. And that was true of Shelby in the Deep Snow. I think that it really took a few chapters for her to sort of be willing to share her secrets and allow me to kind of not just bring her story to the page, but bring her to the page as a woman, and so it's kind of a delicate dance between author and character of reaching a point where it's not me telling the story, it's actually Shelby telling the story, and that's what I'm looking for. I never want to get between the reader and the story or the reader and the characters. I want those characters to speak directly to the reader, and I think that's what provides the impact and the immediacy of the book. I just lost your sound there.
Oh, I'm back. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Oh, there's one more. What is your trick for being so productive as an author? What's the daily routine?
Oh my gosh, that great question. Yeah, I've wanted to write books, my whole life, and I'm now doing 3 a year. I ask, is it possible to have too much of a good thing? Maybe just a little. I've switched my routines a bit over the past 3 years. 3 years, I guess it's been 3 years now. I've been writing 3 books a year, and in the early days, I began switching off books. So I was writing The Bourne Evolution and my last Stride book, Funeral for a Friend, simultaneously, and I would write a week on Bourne and then a week on Stride, and I would trade off for about 6 months getting both books done. I did that again last year with the second Bourne book and with the Ursulina. I would, but I did it not just a week on, a week off, but I would do a few sections and then I would switch off to the other book. But this year I decided, that doesn't really work for me now. I really like to write the books successively because it means I can be completely immersed in one story right from the get-go. And so I decided this year I was going to change my pace and I was going to write each book individually. So I started out the year, I wrote the next Jonathan Stride novel, The Zero Night, which will come out next fall. Then I wrote Girl of My Dreams, which is the new standalone for Thomas Mercer, and now I'm starting in on the next Bourne novel. It makes it sort of, it creates more deadline pressure because I can't kind of feel like I'm nudging all the projects forward, and it means I've got to kind of hammer down and really get each project done in a particular time frame. But I like to be able to sort of be completely inside the story. So I know, based on what my deadline is, kind of where I need to be at different benchmarks for the book and the calendar. And I sort of set, guidelines for myself about what I want to accomplish in a given week. And so I know at any given point kind of whether I'm ahead or behind on the story. And that kind of what helps me modulate my schedule. But it means as a writer, I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think you end up relying on your instincts more, and allowing the story and the characters to take shape on the page as you go. And I think that actually creates a level of immediacy and spontaneity to the story that I think makes it even better.
Fantastic. I think that's it. And before we let you go, I want to ask everyone to open your camera so we can do a group shot. 麻烦大家开摄影机，我们来拍一张合照。It's also a way to tell who is actually listening. Right, let's wait for a few more.
Well, that's great. Well, I have to say, I'm so pleased to have all of you folks joining me today. It's wonderful to have a chance to see you and talk to you, and I hope someday we can do that in person, but I am so honored to have so many people in Taiwan discovering and enjoying the deep snow. That really, it's a special book to me, and it really means a lot to me to have people discovering it there too. So, and by all means, send me emails, post on my Facebook page, and I always love hearing from readers.
Okay, I'm going to take the photo. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. This is so awesome. Thank you. Good night.
Have a great night.